The Marvel Cinematic Universe needs Loki the God Butcher. And here's the reason why. We're gonna talk a little bit slower too. Apparently I've been talking too fast recently for you guys and it's been throwing you guys off. But here's the thing. Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a very toned down version of his character. And anybody who's been reading Marvel Comics for any measure of time will tell you that. Loki's had some crazy schemes in the past in Marvel Comics. There was a time where he incited a war between the Avengers and the Defenders. The Defenders were cool. They were an interesting team. Those guys who don't know, a little bit of history here, a little bit of comic book history here. The Defenders were almost like an extension of the Avengers, but not really. It initially started off as an unfinished Doctor Strange story by Roy Thomas, and he wanted to finish it out, so he finished it in The Incredible Hulk and in Namor the Submariner. But fans loved seeing Doctor Strange cross over with these characters, so Marvel eventually featured a team up between these three characters in a story called Marvel Feature back in the day. And this basically led to fans loving it. So Marvel said, okay, let's just create the Defenders. They gave them their own solo series, and it was huge, ran for like 125 issues. Eventually Marvel canceled it, and then what they followed up with was something called the New Defenders, which got canceled. And then there was actually a group called the Secret Defenders, which was amazing, and I would love to see them in the MCU. We might make a video on that if you guys care anything about this kind of stuff. But the Secret Defenders, is kind of a quick little explanation, was basically a story or a series of stories where Doctor Strange would grab like Wolverine and Spider-Man, Carol Danvers, and like Captain America, and they would go and fight Dormammu or something like that. It was a different roster in every single story, and it was an awesome concept, terribly executed, but it was an awesome concept. But back on track, Loki in the MCU. Loki's had some pretty crazy stories in comics, right? There was a story called Acts of Vengeance, where he actually grabbed all the different villains, or at least the major villains anyway, and had them face off against heroes that they would normally never face off against, and they almost conquered the world. There was a story called the Asgardian Wars, where Loki actually incited a conflict between the Asgardians and the X-Men, which was amazing. But he's done all kinds of crazy things. Loki the God Butcher is probably the most interesting and really the most hyper-violent version of Loki. He's largely based off a character or a version of Loki that actually wiped out all life on Earth. Technically, the way he explains it, humanity was already doing it anyway with like, overpopulation and environmental problems, stuff like that. But he basically ended up killing off all the superheroes, and then humanity just more or less sort of dwindled after that, at least those he didn't obliterate anyway. But the whole idea behind this is it's predicated on a character called Gorr the God Butcher. Now you guys know Gorr the God Butcher is going to be in Thor Love and Thunder, so kind of a brief little explanation here, at least as brief as you can make when it comes to Gorr. Gorr was basically a guy who cursed the gods, and the whole idea behind this is that he lived among a nomadic tribe more or less on just this really crappy world where like nothing ever grew, and life was awful. It was terrible. It was like Moses, right? It was just rough, right? Just walking the desert for eons. Well, the whole thing behind this is that during that time, his wife and his kid died. And so because his tribe always prayed to the gods under the belief that the gods would provide them with like rain, fauna, or flora so they could thrive and grow and eat for a time, that never really seemed to happen. And so Gorr came to the belief that the gods had basically abandoned him. He believed they were real, but he believed they just didn't care about his race or really anybody in general. So because he cursed the gods, he was kicked out of his tribe. Eventually, he comes across the body of a guy named Knull and just some other unnamed god. Now, as a quick aside here, Knull was actually a god or kind of being who existed before all creation. So he's more of like a primordial life force. But basically the way this played out, when the Celestials were like creating life across the universe, which led to the Eternals, that they pissed off Knull because Knull liked the idea of just emptiness, right? He was like the ultimate antisocial person, right? He just wanted to be left alone, like leave my universe alone. And what ended up happening here is a fight ensued between Knull and the Celestials. Knull created something called the All-Black Necrosword and then killed one of the Celestials by cutting his head off. So that giant celestial head that floats in space and is used as basically nowhere, that kind of giant space station everybody hangs out, that's the head of the Celestial that Knull killed. That's why a lot of people who saw the Celestial head in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and then later on saw Knull in Marvel Comics thought the two were connected and that we're gonna see Knull in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know if we really will or not, but Knull was the one who created like the symbiotes like Venom and all that kind of stuff, or at least created the race that eventually led to Venom. The important thing here is that the All-Black Necrosword of Knull was laying on this planet alongside that god. So Gorr picked it up, and then Gorr became Gorr the God Butcher. And so he literally spent like all this time traveling across the universe and just like countless ages killing all these different gods he could come across, right? Like he tortured the god of torture. Like it was crazy, man. Like it was amazing. It was one of the coolest stories ever, right? Thor God of Thunder is where it's sad with Jason Aaron, but it was one of the craziest things. Like, there comes a point in the comics when Gorr is basically defeated by 3 versions of Thor from 3 different time periods. It's like the craziest thing ever, right? Like, Thor has like 2 Mjolnirs and the all black sword. He takes his hammers, like smacks them together, and it's like the craziest thing. But ultimately, Gorr's defeated, right? Now there's a future point in time where he comes back, but before he did, Loki found the all black Necro sword, and then he became Loki the All Butcher. Here's the crazy thing. In this future point in time, again, he's based off the version of Loki that wiped out all life on Earth. So Earth is just like a barren place, like a barren wasteland where like nothing really grows. And then you had Asgard, where old King Thor just dwelled with like his daughters, or his granddaughters, or whoever they were. But the important thing here is that the fight between Loki the All Butcher and old King Thor was crazy. They ended up fighting initially on Asgard and just razed the world, right? Like, just trashed the entirety of Asgard. And then like their fight like blinks out the sun. Like, one of the things that Loki did when he first got the all black Necro sword, he killed Ego the Living Planet. Like, it was nuts. It's a super short moment, right? It only lasts 2 issues or a issue or something like that. It's not a lengthy thing at all. Ultimately, he's killed by Gorr, who actually returns. So it's one of the crazy moments there. But having that version of Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, can you imagine that? Because the only significant thing that Loki's really done up to this point was like lead an invasion in New York, right? Like, an alien invasion on Earth, that's business as usual in Marvel Comics. There are stories that open with that happening, right? Like, the story opens up and like the Avengers are just fighting some enemy somewhere, some alien invasion. They're like, yeah, it's like a Tuesday. And like the story picks up after the aliens are defeated. That's just normal stuff, right? Like, that's nothing special. It was cool in the context of the movie, but in the grand scheme of the things that Loki's done, that's absolutely nothing. And I would love to see like All Butcher or Loki the God Butcher in the MCU. I would love to see that, just dark, twisted, just killed all life on Earth. He's got a sword that lets him kill celestial gods. And it could be one of those things where like, it's like a future version of himself. You don't see a whole lot of it, right? You just see him in a Loki TV show, and you get like maybe half an episode or like a few moments of focus on him. And it's just like, yeah, this is a version of yourself that killed like all the Eternals and killed like all the Avengers. People will appear with magic genes that give them powers at some point in time. And like, you killed all of them. And like, you killed the Celestials. It's just, you killed all these things and did all this stuff, and now you just rule as like some omnipotent god with like a sword made of like the living abyss. Like, that'd be cool, man. Like, I would love to see that. But like, it's stuff like this that gets me excited, man. Like, the possibilities of the MCU, that's what gets me excited, because in the end, it's all based on comics. I mean, sure, like Kevin Feige came out recently and said that like they are delving in the idea of just creating stories on their own that have never happened in comics, which I think is awesome. It creates a cool concept, right? I'm not gonna see a repeat of a story that I've seen before, but I do love the idea of them taking characters like that. And there's a lot of things that I want to see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let me know if you guys are interested in this kind of thing, right? Like, I want to see the Defenders in the MCU. So like the Incredible Hulk, Silver Surfer, Doctor Strange, and Namor the Submariner teaming up, facing off against threats. Like, I want to see Old Man Logan done the right way. I want to see characters like Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear. I want to see this kind of stuff in the MCU. Let me know if you guys are interested in seeing more videos like this, and I will catch you all later. Peace.